Hey guys, what is up? So Tana Mongeau went on Mom's Basement, a podcast by KEEMSTAR and FAZE BANKS. So let's just get right into this 1 hour and 11-minute podcast. So they start off by talking about how Tana would always see FAZE at parties, and they're actually really tight, close friends. They've been friends. Like FAZE talks about how when he first came to LA, Tana was his first friend ever, and Tana says basically the same thing. So whenever they would see each other at parties, FAZE Banks would always try to get Tana to be on the podcast, but Tana would always be hesitant due to KEEMSTAR. And, you know, it's understandable just because KEEMSTAR and Tana Mongeau have been tweeting back and forth. Anytime there's something KEEMSTAR does, like a scandal of some sort, KEEMSTAR has never really been kind to Tana Mongeau on social media, in my opinion. KEEMSTAR goes on to say how he doesn't really have any hatred towards Tana, or Trisha for that matter, but 3 minutes and 10 seconds into this podcast, he starts talking about he only has one hatred towards one individual. Can we guess? Can we guess who that is? Ethan Klein. But it's so funny that I was even thinking that, because after KEEMSTAR says this, take a listen to what FAZE Banks says.
The only person I really hate is Ethan Klein.
Have we had when's the last episode we had without bringing up H3?
Oh my God, never. Like,
that's how I am right now with Austin McBroom, though. I can't do a fucking podcast without talking shit about him.
So then they dive into a conversation of Austin McBroom, which Tana brings up, and says that her last conversation with Austin was him asking her or begging her to not tell Catherine that he was cheating on her. And then they all have this debate of what's really the situation with Austin and Catherine. You know, FAZE Banks says that there's just literally no way. He thinks that it's some type of mutual agreement that they're staying together because of, you know, the Ace family, their whole brand, their empire, the money, the coin, right? That's what FAZE Banks says. And Tana says that she truly believes that Catherine is in denial. But KEEMSTAR goes on to say that at the end of the day, Austin has always been super nice to him and FAZE Banks, so he can at least give him that respect. But just out of curiosity, guys, what do you guys think? I think it's a mutual agreement. I think there's just no way. I don't care how Catherine plays it. I mean, I think those two are both just guilty, but generally speaking, I think it's a mutual agreement. And why wouldn't they want to stay together for the money, right? I mean, they are one of the most popular YouTube channels, like on YouTube, so it would make sense for them, even if they don't want to be together for the coin. I mean, it's not right, but leave a comment below with that. What do you guys think? So anyways, they talk about how Austin is being sued and Bryce Hall is not suing Austin. Take a listen to KEEMSTAR because he seems to have the scoop.
Bryce won't. I don't know why. If I was Bryce Hall, I would be up in the court.
I have inside information. I have inside information, and I can't.
Of course you do, drama alert.
Of course I do, right? But I can't tell you. But all I'm saying is Bryce is happy with the current situation. That's all I can say.
Did he get paid?
I can't say.
Well, that was anticlimactic.
So long story short, Bryce Hall's getting paid. So after this, the conversation dives back into Tana's relationship with FAZE Banks, and they were so close, like very intimate. They actually talk about, they hooked up, and let's just say the hookups were very kinky. Moving on. And then, of course, KEEMSTAR brings up TanaCon, and he goes, you know, that put you on the map. Like, Tana, you must have really loved that clout. And Tana's like, no, listen, I love my clout. I love that all. But when it came over to screwing over my fans, I didn't like that. And I agree with Tana with this. She sounded so sincere about the whole thing. And Tana talks about how, you know, the biggest mistake that she made was trying to be friends with her manager. But she talks about how now she has a really good team. And then FAZE asks Tana, basically, what is she doing with her YouTube channel? And Tana says that she's definitely coming back. You know, YouTube is what made her, but she's really loving her podcast called Cancel right now because she feels as if it's just like a YouTube video as well. Just because, you know, she used to start doing story time, sitting down for 40 minutes, and she's doing the same thing with the podcast. So she does state that she's not leaving YouTube, but she's really enjoying this new project. Tana even mentions that Demi Lovato may actually be a guest, so that's interesting. FaZe also asked Tana about her relationship with Chris Miles, who she's currently in a relationship with. And Tana does address that whole scandal to where she was actually broken up with Chris, and that was because Chris was looking on her phone, and now they've set like boundaries and all that jazz. But anyway, so they're back together, and I get the sense that FaZe was really asking Tana, how do you deal with people still hanging on to your last relationship or your popular relationship? So take a listen to what Tana says.
Such a thing. I think once you're in a really, obviously you can relate to this, Banks, heavily loved, publicized relationship, anything you do after that, people are always going to still want that one.
Yeah.
And that's like definitely a hard thing. I don't necessarily know if the public loves it that much, but also when have I ever done anything the public loves?
So this conversation led FaZe to talk about his past relationship with Alyssa Violet and how, you know, they definitely were fighting all the time. They didn't get along, but now they're on really great terms and he's really happy for her and the relationship that she's in. Then the conversation, it then turns to Keemstar saying, look at us all here. You know, 3 people in this room really not giving enough about other people's opinions, right? And then Tana's like, yeah, you don't want to have other people's opinions consume you, but you know, you also can't be super oblivious as well, like Gabby Hanna. You know, Tana says that at some point, you know, when everyone is saying that you're doing something wrong, then maybe you should just probably stop and listen. So now we're 30 minutes into this podcast where Keemstar asked Tana, you know how Shane Dawson had your back after TanaCon, the whole docuseries? How come you didn't say a word? How come you were silent during Shane Dawson's scandal? Take a listen.
And I think a lot of that shit came out and resonate with it. Like I was like, this is bad. And I was scared to say that as well. I think that's why I stayed silent, because it was just like, I didn't want everyone to be like, he saved you. Obviously, I appreciate his series so much.
So it's definitely worth mentioning that Tana says that she is so thankful for Shane and all he has done to help her, and that he's actually the reason why she started her YouTube channel. However, she was silent because she just really did not agree with a lot of the shit that he did. And then they start to dive back into the conversation about relationships, and that's when Jake Paul is brought up, and how Tana actually states, she slips and says that was like the happiest time of my life, and FaZe Banks is like, aren't you in a relationship now? And she's like, yeah, I'm happy now, but that was the happiest time of my life. But anyways, take a listen to what Tana Mongeau says about Jake Paul.
What hurts me even more is it's like, okay, you can look at it as the clout play and you can say, I played my part and he played his part. But also, who was there every night when he was crying? Who was there?
You.
Who was there over his family? Who was there every single day, every scandal? Who was sitting
Tana
there?
Mongeau.
But it was genuinely out of love. You know, when you're a girl and you're being so gaslighted by someone you're so in love with, you're like, he's misunderstood. No one understands him.
True.
That was literally me.
So true.
I was like, no one understands him. I have to be there. No one's close to him. Blah, blah, blah. I did everything.
So I know me personally, I definitely didn't follow Tana and Jake Paul's relationship because I was on YouTube. But from my understanding from this podcast, Jake Paul believes that any single success Tana has, it's because he gave it to her. So then I thought this was interesting because Tana talks about how a few weeks ago she was hanging out with Charli D'Amelio and they were talking about cancel culture and how Charli told Tana that there's like basically 3 buckets of cancel culture. So there's the first bucket is the person who definitely deserves to be canceled for what they did. It was inappropriate, wrong, they deserve to be called out, right? And then the second one is for people who they did something wrong, but you know, they need to grow, but they don't necessarily need to be canceled, you know? They need to be called out, they're in the public eye, but you know, they're learning and they're growing. And then there's Charli, who she says that by just literally breathing, she's being canceled. So you know what? I don't necessarily disagree with that. So yeah, I thought it was really cool that a 17-year-old was talking to Tana Mongeau about cancel culture. And then unsurprisingly, they start talking about James Charles and how Tana said that she used to be friends with him and actually cut him off prior to all this scandal. Take a listen.
James always adored power. That was my biggest thing with James.
People he can control.
Me as a friend, he'd be like, if you're gonna go out and drink tonight, like I'm gonna cancel you. Like he was just like that. He wanted everyone in his life to be a certain way because of his power, and if you couldn't be that, you weren't gonna be in his life. And I went back and forth trying because he, you know, obviously like when someone's your friend, you want to think they have redeemable qualities. But after a while, I was like, you're a bad person, and
he actually is.
So they start talking about how a lot of influencers abuse their power, and Tana starts bringing up David Dobrik. And, you know, obviously she's going to be biased. I mean, she bought his house, they're friends, but she brings up how James Charles is still on YouTube doing his thing, and he actually committed a crime, to whereas David Dobrik, he, in her opinion, yes, he did some things wrong, but it was really his friends. And KEEMSTAR and FAZE talk about how David Dobrik was really putting his views first before the people in his videos, and how it's crazy how David didn't have like human resources, just like checks and balances, things like that, and now he has that. And honestly, that is kind of crazy that someone on David's level who was going on like mainstream media, you know, currently I think on the Discovery Channel, was on Nickelodeon, all this jazz, didn't have all that shit set up. So that was strange. But Tana goes on to say that, and I think this is really important just because she knows both of these two individuals. And she says when she was around James, you know, it was power. That's all it was. And that's all he looked for. Like he wanted people to be beneath him, right? Whereas David, his mind was set on how can I get a really great vlog to entertain people. James was more dark, whereas David Dobrik just needed some learning. Tana does not believe that David Dobrik should have gotten the huge cancellation that he got. So now we're an hour into the podcast where Tana actually brings up Ethan Klein, and she's just like, I really don't know that much about him other than, you know, what Trisha told her. And so they give Tana the quick summary that KEEMSTAR says Ethan is this depressed, lonely man who thinks he's doing basically God's work, so to speak, and how he's miserable. And FAZE tells Tana that Ethan was never this way, how he just changed because of the audience, and etc. And to end the podcast, they just start talking about cancel culture and how Tana says that if it wasn't for her cancellations, she wouldn't have learned anything from them. And she really truly feels like she's grown from them. And then they all end it with saying how they love each other, you know, all that jazz, blah, blah. So that was the whole 1 hour and 11-minute podcast. Leave a comment below. I'm curious on, it's so funny, I'm curious on, I wonder if Tana, this is just like a theory of mine, okay? But because of the relationship, I never really knew how close Tana was to FAZE Banks. And in the podcast, there was a point to when they were talking about how close their relationship was, talking about how intimate they were with each other, all that kinkiness. Tana does mention that she would try to make FAZE Banks jealous because she was really into him. Now, I wonder, because keep in mind, Jake Paul and FAZE Banks, they were beefing, and I wonder, because mind you, this is just a theory. I didn't sit there and look at the timelines and stuff, but I wonder if, did Tana date Jake Paul to make FAZE Banks jealous in the beginning? That's what I wonder. I could be totally be wrong. I didn't look at the timelines, but I'm just curious because I didn't even realize how like tight they were. And let me know what you think about the whole Austin McBroom and Catherine. Is it mutual or what? Because now that whole entire podcast got me thinking about them for a second. So yeah, that was the podcast. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Bye guys.